Good morning, everybody. How are you doing today? Welcome to class. It is Thursday, July 4th. How's it? It's Thursday, July 1st, excuse me. Coming up to July 4th weekend. Everybody got something on tap for the 4th? Hopefully you're having some sort of socially appropriate, socially distanced weekend. I'm wearing my Puerto Rico shirt today. Yo soy Puerto Rico. Have any of you ever been to Puerto Rico? It's freaking awesome. I'd love to move there one day. So today we're going to be talking about chapter 9, which is motivation and emotion. Today I'm going to be talking about theories of motivation, and tomorrow we're going to talk about theories of emotion. If you would, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so how's everybody doing? Donnie, good to see you. KB, good to see you. I got somebody blew up my phone. Good morning, Renee Young. Always with the question mark. What does that mean, Renee? Are you asking me if I'm having a good morning, or are you telling me to have a good morning? It's always curious to me. I hope you're doing all right, though. How many people have we got out there in audience land right now? We got about 4 people. Not a bad number. Let's go ahead and get started. So, today I'm going to talk to you about motivations as being the primary human quality that differentiates us from computers. Then we're going to talk about some of the different theories of motivation. We're going to talk about drive reduction theory. We're going to talk about optimal arousal theory. And then we're going to talk about need satisfaction theories. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started without further ado. Now, if you look in your textbook in chapter 9, I forget exactly what page it is, but table 9.1, 9.1 sort of summarizes what we're going to go over today, the theories of human motivation. Renee's, it's a tilde that says, you're chilling. I hear you. So now I'm hip and I know how to chill too, Renee. So the neat thing about motivations is that's really what differentiates us from computers. A computer is an information processing system, just like a human mind is. But what differentiates us is that a computer won't do anything until you provide input and instructions. Human beings, on the other hand, are curious. We bounce around, we have motivations, we like things, we don't like things, and we use our emotions to guide us towards things that we like and away from things that we don't like. And the question is, what exactly motivates human beings? Now, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the behaviorist perspective, and that's what we might call an incentive-based theory. And you see here at the bottom of table 9.1, they're going to talk about incentive-based theories. You can think of behaviorism as a way of describing what motivates humans. Humans are out there trying to avoid punishment and trying to achieve reinforcement, right? We avoid things that are associated with negative emotions, and we go towards things that are associated with positive emotions. But behaviorism, if you think about it, is actually an extrinsically motivating theory. It talks about how human beings are motivated by outside sources. So yes, maybe I go to school because my parents will yell at me if I don't. But what about those qualities that make me want to go to school? Those things that make me want to do something. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about these internal qualities. But first, I do want to suggest to you that you can think of incentives as basically the theory of behaviorism. All right? And we're going to differentiate between external motivators, that is, things that come from the outside that motivate your behavior, and intrinsic motivators, which are those things that come from inside you. Now, let's think about this. How many of you come to the Friday webinars and do the discussion boards simply because you can't get enough of psychology? Or how many of you do it for the extra credit? Yeah, You're funny, KB. Thank you for the page 337. You're so full of you know what, KB, but I love your style, right? I remember last spring I mentioned that in class, and this one kid that had been coming the whole semester was suddenly embarrassed and tried to tell me, no, I may be getting extra credit, but I like it as well. And you know what? I told him, look, dude, don't worry about it. If I thought it was intrinsically motivating, I wouldn't provide the extra credit. I mean, the whole point that I provide the extra credit is to motivate you to do something that you probably don't want to do, right? So those are incentives or extrinsic motivators. But let's talk for a few minutes about the intrinsic motivators that guide and push our behavior. So the first theory we're going to talk about is drive reduction theory, which has been researched within the context of eating most thoroughly. And so you can think of drive reduction as a desire to achieve homeostasis, or a sense of balance, right? Your book has a little diagram. If you get too hot, your body sweats, and that sweat cools you off. On the other hand, if your body is a little bit too cold, you start to shiver, and that generates energy and heat, which warms you up. So you can think of your body as wanting to stay in a state of homeostasis or balance. And you can think about a drive as any psychological state that motivates an organism into a behavior to satisfy this homeostatic need. So we need oxygen. Turns out, you folks, I think we talked about, what is that when you sleep at night when you can't breathe? What's that sleeping disorder? Not narcolepsy. Well, you need a CPAP machine. That's, help me out, Ken. What's that disorder? That sleep disorder where you need a CPAP machine. Thank you, Madison. Sleep apnea. Your brain has a circuit in the medulla which measures the level of oxygen in your body. If, for example, you have an obstruction, which people in sleep apnea often do, your body doesn't get enough oxygen. So once the oxygen levels fall down to their too low, your brain shocks you awake. You take a big gulp or a breath or a snore, if you will, and restore that level of oxygen back to its proper level, and then you go back to sleep. You can think of the same thing as happening with food and water. Our body acts whenever it's out of homeostasis to bring it back into homeostasis. So hunger is a demonstration of drive reduction and this homeostasis. Now, almost all of these homeostatic needs are driven by the hypothalamus. It regulates these drives, your need for hunger, your need for water, your need for air, your need for sex. And it is, in fact, this particular area that gets out of whack that causes people to engage in problematic eating or problematic drinking or problematic sexual behavior. And your book even talks about damage to the ventromedial hypothalamus, which is that is the middle part of your hypothalamus. Ventral is going to be on the middle of the hypothalamus, right? Now, your book talks about different hormone levels that vary in your bloodstream that help control this homeostatic drive. So if you'll remember, we talked about hormones as being just like neurotransmitters. That is, they act on synapses, but these chemicals, instead of being released locally at synapses, they're released globally or systemically into your blood system, and then they float around your blood system. And so we know for a fact that glucose, so that low levels in your bloodstream provide the short-term hunger signal that drives you to want to eat. And also it turns out that your stomach secretes a hormone called ghrelin when your stomach is empty. And this causes also a short-term hunger signal. So you can think of these chemicals as flowing through your body, working together with your thalamus to reestablish homeostatic balance if you wind up hungry or thirsty or oxygen deprived. So one theory of why humans are motivated to behave, especially with these biological drives, is that our system is built to maintain a state of homeostasis. Now, I've actually got a video in the course resources folder that I want you to watch for Friday's lecture, Friday's webinar. And it's a fellow named Alex Honnold who did a movie called Free Solo, where he documents his attempt to climb a 3,300-foot cliff with no ropes. That's called free soloing. So he tries to climb El Capitan, which is this incredibly insane looking steep cliff that's 3,300 feet high, and he climbed it without ropes. And you might ask yourself, why in the hell would anybody do something like that? And it turns out that if you look at Alex Honnold's brain using an MRI, which they have, the kinds of things that typically cause your amygdala, your emotional center, to light up with activity don't activate his amygdala. He actually needs more stimulation to activate his amygdala. So you can think of everybody in the world as having a need for an optimal level of arousal. How many of you have been terrified in your life, or overwhelmed, or just having too much going on? Me, we all have. And how many of you have had the experience of being bored to death? Me. Each and every one of us tries to find a place somewhere between boredom and terror or being overwhelmed. And we'll call that our state of optimal arousal. Okay, now it differs depending upon your biological makeup, how your amygdala and your medial temporal memory system exactly. KB points it out, some people, in a sense, are adrenaline junkies. Their brain needs it. Now, you know what? I haven't put it in there yet, but I'm going to do it right after class. There's a video called The Dangerous Few, and it's a 1-hour documentary that provides a case study of a couple of different people who are sociopaths, right? These people who break the law and do horrible things. And the whole point of this documentary is that maybe people are sociopathic because they need more stimulation to be excited and feel normal compared to you and I. So where you and I would be absolutely terrified to rob somebody, to grab a gun and steal something, to steal a car, where the feelings of terror would overwhelm you and I, these kinds of stimulations cause these people, if you will, to feel normal. And the crazy thing about this video is they identify people as young as 3 or 4 as being at risk for being sociopathic due to too little activity in their emotional centers. Yes, KB, the first rule of Fight Club is that there is no Fight Club, right? And so you should really watch this video. They start off, it's a case study of this young kid that's already killed 3 animals by the age of 6, all right? He microwaved a cat at the age of 3. He broke his grandmother's dog's back at the age of 5, and he killed another random dog in the neighborhood by throwing bricks at it, right? And you're like, oh my God, what is wrong with this kid? And the thing is, you're shocked, but it turns out that maybe what stimulates you and I doesn't stimulate him. Oh my goodness. We're going to bring down the power centers, right? Okay, so now here's the thing. This idea of optimal arousal is actually used in sports psychology. Now there's this thing called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which suggests that in order to achieve at your optimum, you need to have the perfect amount of arousal. So the quality of your performance is dependent upon your level of arousal. Now, if you are not aroused or excited at all about my exam, my midterm 2 coming up, you won't study, you won't prepare, you won't try hard. So if you don't have enough arousal when it comes to the idea of taking my exam, you won't do very well in this class. I see students that make 20s and 30s because they just don't give a crap. On the other hand, I have some students that come in so nervous and terrified with so much test anxiety that even though they know the right answers, they make stupid mistakes and make 50s or 60s on my tests. And both of these people have inappropriate levels of arousal that prevent them from performing at an optimal level. Okay, so Yerkes-Dodson law demonstrates this relationship between arousal and performance. And the weird thing is, this curve is different for everybody. The shape of it is the same, but where your optimal performance lies is different for each and every person. And also, I have mentioned to you, sports psychologists know that depending upon the type of activity you're engaging in, more or less arousal is important. So for things like golf, where you're putting and making these really small movements, it's very important to maintain a relatively low level of arousal. If any of you have ever played golf before and screamed and cussed when you hit a bad shot, you'll notice that pro golfers don't do that. They act like they don't even care. And they're not doing that because they don't care, but they know that in order to perform at their optimum level, they must stay relaxed and maintain their level of arousal. On the other hand, football or racing or weightlifting, where the goal is just to have a very simple, strong, powerful burst of activity, more arousal is going to create a more optimal performance. And that's why if any of you have ever been on a football team, in the locker room before you go out, you fans don't see this, but we act like a bunch of idiots in the locker room, screaming and chanting and jumping up and down and smacking each other on the shoulders and getting so fired up and aroused that you're freaking ready to just walk on hot coals. And that sort of goes with the football mentality. And if you want to be a sports psychologist, what you have to do is teach your clients how to maintain the appropriate level of arousal. I used to help coach the baseball team here at Wake Tech, and I worked with pitchers. And one of the things that we would do is work on focused, sort of, if you will, guided activities where we would sit and imagine pitching through difficult innings so that I could get my pitchers to talk through the emotions that they were feeling while they were having a bad inning. And then right there in the lab, I could coach them through these feelings so that when they got on the mound and I couldn't talk to them, they could self-coach and keep their level of anxiety down. Does that make? Yes, to clear the mechanism. One of the things that we like to talk about in baseball is when you go up to bat, leave your brain on the bench is what they say. And that's sort of what KB's talking about. Don't psych yourself out. Clear your mind, clear the mechanism when you go up to bat. So leave your brain on the bench, which is just a fancy, a funny way of saying you need to maintain your level of arousal. I have a friend who was a very good baseball pitcher, and he actually made it up, and he got a late season call-up in the major leagues. The major league rosters expand from 25 to 40 in September when the minor league seasons close, and they reward usually 15 or so good minor leaguers with just a month in the major leagues to let them get a taste of what it's like. It's called getting a cup of coffee. You can Google that. It's a term that major leaguers use to talk about these late season call-ups. They get to come up and play baseball for a month. And my friend got a cup of coffee one year with the Los Angeles Angels. And he said the first time he walked out of the tunnel from from the locker room onto the field. There were 52,000 screaming fans at Los Angeles Angels Stadium. And he said that he couldn't feel his legs. He was so numb with terror and fear. And just imagine that, not only performing, but performing in front of 20,000, 30,000 football players, perform in front of 70 and 80 and 90,000 fans at one time. And yet you still have to maintain that optimal level of arousal. How are you doing, Needy? It's good to see you. Everybody doing all right so far? Looks like we've got about 8 people here. Not a bad lecture for a Wednesday afternoon. Donnie Hahn, we got Madison. Was it Madison G or Madison Fitz? Oh, it was Madison Fitz. Hi, Sydney. So just to say hello to everybody who's come here at the last few minutes. Now, the last theory I want to talk about. So one theory suggests that human beings are born in this homeostatic balance, and that our biological systems cause us to eat, to drink, to have sex in order to maintain these hormone balances. And then a second theory suggests that human beings have a sort of a set point for level of arousal. And when it comes to performance, these people talk about how arousal can affect our performance. Now, I'd like to drop back for a minute and talk a little bit about a psychodynamic theory of motivation. If you remember in chapter 1, I talked about Sigmund Freud and the psychodynamic perspective. He sort of coined the first, he fathered the first approach to psychology, along with behaviorism and cognitive psychology. And Freud thought that human beings followed this need called the pleasure principle. I don't know if any of you have heard of Sigmund Freud, but his theory was that everybody did everything because they were motivated sexually. So he argued that people are motivated to do things that feel good. And he even had this biological theory where he talked about your stomach, and this was before we knew about ghrelin and insulin and all these other stuff. He talked about these biological urges manifesting themselves in our body, the urge for sex, the urge for food. And he argued that we talk about these urges in cognitive terms. We give cognitive terms to these labels. So, whereas your stomach tells you you're hungry, you say, wow, I am starved. Whereas your body tells you you're sexually aroused, you come up with a cognitive label and you say, hey, I'm horny, right? And so, and you instead turn these instinctual drives into wishes. Man, I wish I could eat. Man, I wish I could drink. Man, I wish I could have sex. And he argued that we all follow, in a sense, this need that drives us all. Now, people began to riff off of his idea that human beings are driven by these internal needs. Most of Freud's colleagues thought that his idea that people were driven by these biological needs was true, but people disagreed with him about the nature of these new needs. So, whereas Freud thought that everybody's need was for sexual gratification, Alfred Adler thought people had a need for superiority. Freud's colleague, Karen Horney, thought that people's primary need was for belongingness. And so there are different needs that were postulated by these psychoanalytic theorists. I'm going to point out 2 of them here in this lecture. One is the need for achievement. And there's actually a personality test developed on Charles Murray's work, which measures that academic need that some students have. Now, some of you have the mindset C's equal degrees, and you really don't care about making an A in this class. You just want to get past this class. On the other hand, I remember I had an A student argue with me at the end of the semester about 3 questions on 3 of his homeworks so he could have the highest grade point average in the class. It wasn't just good enough that he made an A in my class, but he sat beside a student, a female student, who had a little bit higher average in the class, and he told me that he absolutely had to have the highest average in the class. I remember I had a friend who taught at Duke University for a while, and he had a student call him up after graduation, right, in June. This kid already had a degree from Duke, he had a job, and he was calling to complain about his A- in my friend's class at Duke. These people are sort of driven with a need for achievement. I don't know if any of you watched that biography of Michael Jordan recently. I forget the name of that biography. It came on Netflix, was it? I'm not sure. I'm a Michael Jordan fan, but not necessarily a huge sports fan. Michael Jordan is driven by a need for achievement. I've heard that there's nothing that he plays or nothing that he does that he isn't driven to be the best at. He has what we would call a high need for achievement. And then we also talked about in chapter 4, we talked about this desire for attachment as a fundamental human need and an adaptive motivation for the social animal. So those are some different needs that were postulated after Freud postulated his need. Do we need to be powerful? Do we need to belong? Do we need to achieve? Each and every one of these psychodynamic theorists had a different idea about what was important to the human animal. But you know what? I would say sometimes the most important need is for sex. But other times, the most important need is to achieve something. Then in other times, I need to belong and fit into other groups. And sometimes I just need a drink of water, right? And so there's this guy named Abraham Maslow, and he argued that, you know what, all of you guys are right, and all of you guys, in a sense, are wrong. Because in a sense, humans have multiple needs. And some of these needs are more prepotent or basic than others, but all of these needs are important to human beings. And so he argues that if you really, what you need to do is think about these human motivations systemically, and let's organize them from those that are more primary to those that are more secondary, right? Because people sometimes seem to have everything and yet still commit suicide. And you ask yourself, what was that person missing? What was it that caused people to feel this social illness that sometimes wealthy, successful people who have it all seem to feel? And so his theory sort of encapsulates the moving motivations that human beings have. So he argues at the most basic level, people have a need for food, water, warmth, oxygen, and sleep. And if you are missing any of these things, then really sex or acceptance or self-esteem doesn't really matter to you. You need to eat. And people who are hungry sometimes don't worry about what the meaning of life is, because for them the meaning of life is getting the next piece of bread or the next drink of water. Right? Now, once we take care of these physiological needs, he argues that most people tend to focus on safety needs, right? Security, protection, being comfortable, being safe from the elements, having a roof over your head, having a fence around your house. And you know what? If you think about it, you can go on Facebook right now and see tons of people who are terribly afraid and driven by their need for security, for protection, for freedom from threats. I don't really worry about being attacked or killed every day, but I have several gun-toting friends that are deathly afraid, that are very worried about their level of security day to day. And so these people have weapons on their person, in their cars, and in their houses. So for these people, maybe there are some unmet safety needs that still are prepotent for these people. Now, he argues that generally when people have their physiological and safety needs met, that people tend to worry about fitting in and belonging and being a part of society. And loneliness and the feeling that we're not having as much social interaction as we deserve is a very common feeling for many people. And in fact, research suggests that social media, by giving us potential access to more people, actually increases our feelings of loneliness, because we have unrealistic expectations for how much friendship and how much social interaction and acceptance we may feel. And you know what? Somebody on Facebook or Instagram can say something rude about one of your beliefs and suddenly challenge your feelings of belongingness and acceptance. Now, after we've got our physiological needs, our safety needs, and our belongingness needs, Maslow argued that most people then are interested in fulfilling needs for self-esteem, not only feeling good about myself, but having you and everyone else feel good about me. If any of you have ever felt less than good about yourself or had self-esteem problems, you know how desperately we need to feel good about who we are as human beings. And not only do we need that, we need our friends and other people to think well of us, right? So for me, it's important that all of my colleagues think I'm a good teacher. You know what? I hate to say it, but it's important to me that you, the students, think I'm a good teacher. If you don't think I'm a good teacher, that really prevents me from achieving these esteem needs. And KB, no smart butt comments now about the teaching. Okay. So we all have these needs. Now, he argued, there you go, pump me up, Madison. Woo-hoo. My head just got a little bigger. Okay, so he argues that sometimes you'll see people, though, that do crazy things. They climb mountains, right? Or they paint, or they write books. Or some people march for freedom, and some people protest things that really don't have anything to do with them because they have this insane desire to see things be fair in life. And he argues that once we fulfill all of these needs, and he argues that all of these needs are homeostatic. You just need the certain amount. You don't need any more. And he argues if you get focused on getting too much of these, you actually delay yourself from self-actualization. But he argues that he calls these D needs or deficiency needs. I only need enough water to kill my thirst. I only need enough belongingness to make me feel loved. I only need enough self-esteem to make me feel good about myself. But he argues that self-actualization is a B need. It's a being need. And once you get to that self-actualized part of life, you can't get enough of it. So why does Bill Gates continue to work? He has all the money in the world. It's because for Bill Gates, creating business structures and solving the world's problems with his money feels good, right? Why does Stephen King continue to write novels? Well, he's got all the money in the world. Well, Stephen King likes to write novels because they make him feel good. And why do people paint? And why does Alex Honnold continue to climb 3,000-foot cliffs even after he's already done it? It's because these people want to fulfill this inside potential. So why did I climb Mount Everest? Because it was there. Absolutely, KB. And what you're talking to is people who are in the process of self-actualizing. And hopefully, each and every one of you can take care of these more basic needs. And once you begin to self-actualize, you become a much happier and a much fuller person. And one of the things that I will argue that occurs as you get into my age and get to the top, the relative top of your career, I'm at the top of Wake Tech, you know what I mean? Big fish in a little pond. Once you take care of love and family and money and all of that stuff, really, it becomes about doing things that interest you and challenge you. And sometimes people even switch careers midlife because they want to feel this sense of fulfillment. Self-actualization, when people are self-actualizing, they are in the flow, KB. And when you're doing things that create a sense of flow, you are on your way to self-actualizing. Yes, yes, yes. Very good point, KB. All right, so let me round up this lecture real quick. Motivations is what sets us apart from computers. It causes us to pick directions and to do things. Computers just sit around until you tell them what to do. Humans do all kinds of good, bad, and crazy things because they have motivations. And so the question is, how are our systems motivated. One theory that relates to biological functioning says that our biological systems are motivated to stay in a state of homeostasis. And we talked specifically about how hunger relates to that. Then I suggested to you this idea of avoiding boredom, this idea of appropriate level of arousal. And I suggested to you that this research has been done within the context of sports psychology and how to keep athletes performing at their optimal state. And then I suggested to you a psychodynamic theory by a fellow named Abraham Maslow. Actually, he would have called himself a humanist. And we'll talk about the difference between humanism and psychodynamic psychology in a couple of weeks. But he suggested that human beings are driven by these intrinsic needs, and that these needs depend upon which needs have been fulfilled first. So, motivations are directions that we pick, but how do we pick these directions? Our directions depend upon our affective state. So tomorrow we're going to talk about affect or moods, which is the degree to whether or not you approach things because you like them, or you avoid things because you dislike them, because you avoid things because you are angry, or because you go towards things because you are happy. So tomorrow we're going to talk about affective states or emotions. Anybody have questions? All right then. I'm going to say goodbye, and I hope to see you.
Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please consult your directory and call again, or ask your operator for assistance. This is a recording.